C'est orange juice.
What's up everyone, this is Orange Juice. The clone spell duplicates units with 1 hit point. It also duplicates the mechanics of that unit. So I made a graveyard deck with giant skeleton and guards to take advantage of the clone spell. I don't want the ice spirit dealing damage to my tower, so I absorbed it with an ice golem. Mana will have an elixir advantage if I just let the ice golem die. So I used my giant skeleton and guards to support the push. I casted the clone spell because a clone bomb is fun. He counters with an ice golem, and when it pops, its frost nova hurts my clone guards. They survive since they had a shield. My giant skeleton dies and it just barely reaches the tower. A giant skeleton's bomb has a 2-tile radius. If you're unsure what this is exactly, a rocket is a good example because it also has a 2-tile radius. That bomb goes off, kills the archers, and deals just under 1,000 damage to the tower. Mana counter pushes with the hog, but my cannon stops it. He tries to fireball, but it's too late. Things are looking good on my side, and I'm waiting to build up a really huge push to use graveyard just because it's so expensive, and I can't afford a good push until the momentum builds up. With that in mind, I start with an ice golem in the back. Then I plant my giant skeleton a bit more forward because I want to be more aggressive, since I can clone at any time to set off a bomb in the front. He defends with an ice golem, which is clone spell's worst enemy, so this is stopping me from using my clone spell right now, because my clone guards will just lose their shields to its frost nova again. As soon as his ice golem dies, that's when I cast the clone spell. His ice spirit kills the giant skeleton and knocks out the shield, but my clone guards are still alive. The bomb kills his mega minion and an archer. Overall, really successful defense. If his mega minion locked onto my guards instead of my real giant skeleton, that would have been a really good attack. This just goes to show how fragile this spell is. It looked like a really huge push, but it was easily taken care of by a few troops and zap. Taking advantage of that single archer, Mana pushes with his hog and fireballs my cannon. If he predicted the cannon and fireballed earlier, the hog would have landed a shot, but at least that archer did get one hit in. With double elixir coming in, I plant my giant skeleton in the back because I snowball a big push, then cast graveyard. Mana still doesn't know I have graveyard, otherwise he wouldn't have planted those archers just now. To protect my giant skeleton, I planted an ice golem in the front with guards to tank as well. This is a really big push and I can't wait for the ice golem to pop, so I clone the units knowing my shielded guards will still survive. All the clones die immediately, but the clone bomb did kill his mega minion. With my giant skeleton coming in full force and graveyard casted on his tower, he already cycled back to his archers, but joke's on him, I cycled back to my clone spell. The clone bombs deal over 900 damage, but that tower really only had 16 health left anyways. With 30 seconds left on the clock, there's no way he can sneak a hog to my tower, so I just defend it out for the next 30 seconds, and that is good game. Clone spell isn't going to make the giant skeleton overpowered, it has to reach the tower first, and that's fairly difficult to do. During my visit to Supercell headquarters, I actually had a chance to speak with the game designer, and he showed me this really complex spreadsheet where he has to take into consideration how one buff or nerf will change the interaction of 60 other cards, so it's a pretty complicated process. The clone spell is pretty cool because the giant skeleton has needed a buff for a long time, and the clone spell indirectly buffs this card for the better. Jumping into the second replay, Mana is running the same deck. Now at this point, I've lost about 10 games to his frozen hog deck, trying to get my clone spell to work. This is the first time where I used Lava Hound in my deck. Starting off, he goes in with a super aggressive hog. We're not even at full elixir yet. This gamble does not pay off because I have a tombstone in rotation. I don't want the hog touching my tower, so I used archers, but since I used my archers, I couldn't let them die, so I sent in my miner. He completely shuts down my archers with his ice golem, but at least my miner did a couple hundred damage to his tower. Again, I don't want him touching my tower, so I counter his archers with minions, but looking back, I could have just zapped them. With his mega minion planted in the back, I plant a lava hound in the back, knowing that it'll distract that mega minion when we engage in battle. But he tricked me because he planted a hog way in the front. He fireballs my tombstone, but again, if he predicted that, he would have gotten one more hit on my tower. He tries to pull my lava hound into his cannon, but I clone skipped it, so it bypasses the cannon and it goes straight to his tower. His ice golem pops, but it was only in range to kill one cloned pup. I sent in my miner to take out the archers as well as to tank for the lava hound since the cannon was expiring. He already used zap on my clone pup, so he literally had nothing to defend except a fireball. And that single push ends up annihilating his tower. It's apparent that his deck doesn't have enough splash to deal with 2 lava hounds. so I'm going in for one final Lava Hound push. He zaps my minions right as I clone them. This destroys my cloned Mega Minion and cloned minions, but it pops the Hound and the pups spawn immediately. This is the best case scenario for me. Sending in my miner to add insult to injury, there's not much else he can do, but he fireballs and that was pretty good value. I'm at such a huge lead that I just plant my Lava Hound to tank everything while my troops clean up his troops. Then clone the Hound right before it pops. That didn't really do anything, but it did apply enough pressure to force him to defend instead of push. There's no way Mana will be able to push hard enough to take out my tower, and that is pretty much good game. I wouldn't have been so reckless planting the Lava Hound in the front, but I knew there was only 30 seconds left, and I had a tombstone knowing that his hog was his only win condition. Clone Spell seems to synergize very well with the Lava Hound, but it's not quite as easy as this replay made it look. Let's check out what happened. Near the beginning of the match, Mana used Fireball to take out my tombstone, and that barely provides any value for him. That Fireball would have proved to be way more useful to take out my Lava Hound push. In this last replay, Mana is running a giant bowler with an Ice Golem. Now, his deck has Zap, the Log, and an Ice Golem, so it totally destroys Clone Spell. I'm running a Zap bait deck, planting my Princess in the front for that free chip damage. I'm trying to figure out his rotation. He has the Log. Now at this point, I plant my Skeleton Army because I want to see if he has Zap or Ice Golem in rotation yet. Because if he zaps them, I'll be able to use my minion horde freely. He doesn't have the spells in rotation, and counters with a Musketeer. This is when I heard him mumbling from across the room saying he should have zapped. Now this seems like the perfect time to use Clone Spell on my minion horde, but I don't, because I've lost 10 games in a row and know he's expecting that and has an Ice Golem ready. So I throw my Goblin Barrel to the left side. I wait until the Ice Golem pops before cloning, but it's 1 second too slow, so I only cloned one minion. We've been playing way too many games at this point because he literally read my mind and pre-plants a bowler to take out my Princess. She doesn't even get a shot off the tower because she already locked onto that bowler. Knowing his Log is back in rotation, I don't use Skeleton Army, so I counter with an Inferno Tower to take out the bowler. He plants a Giant in the back, knowing my Inferno will expire. I know he doesn't have Zap in rotation yet, so I counter his Giant with Minion Horde, while sending in a Goblin Barrel, but he immediately counters with a Log. I'm still waiting for an opportunity to use my Clone Spell. There just haven't been many opportunities. He always has a Bowler, Zap, the Log, or an Ice Golem in rotation. He saves his Zap using Mega Minion to clean up my Skeleton Army, knowing that his Zap will destroy everything I throw at him. The Lightning takes out my Inferno Tower, and the Giant starts doing serious business. But right now I know he only has the Log in rotation, so it's safe to play the Minion Horde. It takes out the Giant, but I can't clone them, since they'll die immediately to that Ice Golem. I plant my Princess waiting for his Log so I can plant Skeleton Army. He takes my bait and zaps them. And this is the window I've been waiting for the entire game. He's finally out of rotation. I send in my Goblin Barrel, and this is the second time in the entire game I use my Clone Spell. And that just wrecks his tower, dealing so much damage. A Zap and a Princess, and that is good game. Mana really thought he could have countered my Goblin Barrel with his Bowler, because the last game we played, he was extremely confident with his Bowler taking out all 3 Goblins. The only difference is that the Clone Spell offset the Bowler's angle, and my Goblins just destroyed him. Ultimately, the basic mechanic of duplicating units is very difficult to use, because almost every card counters Clone Spell. You really have to count the cards and know their exact rotation, otherwise you're wasting a lot of elixir. Here's a clip from the very first game I played using Zap Bait with Clone Spell. Mana wrecked my clones with his Ice Golem. For 3 elixir, you can't justify spamming the spell. You really need to think when it's worth it and when it's not. I only used this card twice the final match. It was the card that won me the game in the end. It has really cool interactions and can mimic a Witch, Guards, Dark Prince, Giant Skeleton, and all of their mechanics. But at the end of the day, those units only have 1 hit point. I feel like the best use for Clone Spell is to play it conservatively, and only when there's an opening. If your opponent has an Ice Golem, it pretty much counters every single cloned unit. In a Zap Bait deck, there just isn't enough elixir to pull off mass cloning everything. I had to memorize and carefully track Mana's card rotation. Even then, I had almost 0 openings. The single best unit that interacts with Clone Spell I feel is the Lava Hound, because you want the cloned Hound to pop its pups. This forces your opponent to prematurely use arrows or zap, so when the real Hound pops, they won't have anything to address the real pups. Mega Minion is really good against the Hound one-on-one since it one-shots the pups. But with clone pups, it's really easily distracted and it doesn't have enough attack speed to kill 10 pups at once. At the end of the day, this is very difficult to use when your opponent has a Zap or Ice Golem. I don't see the spell shifting the meta that much because these cards are really versatile and found in a lot of decks. But I do hope to see some really cool usage with this spell, and hopefully even some high level games where players will use this card to clone skip. Thanks for watching, stay tuned for more quality OJ. Come join us on Ban where you can interact with other Clash Royale players, submit decks, pictures, or talk strategy. We give away $100 worth of gift cards every month.